Hello and welcome to another Iceberg video. It seems like you guys really enjoyed the NCS ranking from last year, so I've decided to do some more coverage on NCS through a mid-year ranking, covering the best that this label has to offer in 2024 so far. I was pretty close to calling the first half of this year a downright bad start for NCS, but was it really? Maybe it was more of a bland start because while there weren't too many awful songs so far this year, there weren't really too many good ones either. It kind of makes sense when you take into account the over-reliance on the likes of pop, drum and bass, and even Brazilian funk. But there's a part of me that's pretty optimistic about what NCS can offer heading into the rest of the year. So for those who haven't seen one of my ranking videos before, this list consists of one track per artist, and it will be originals only. I would say for now that the top 3 are pretty much locked in for my year-end best list, but the rest of my list is all fair game heading into the end of this year. So with all of that out of the way, it's time to talk about the top 10 best NCS tracks of 2024 so far. Number 10. I love it when an artist that made my worst list last year winds up making my best list the year after. And with this track, you have to take into account the overall production to really understand why it's here. Sometimes it's what's outside the drop that grabs my attention. I don't think I made a mistake putting Lacrimose so high on my worst list last year. I do think I made a mistake by not having Would You Ever as an honorable mention, because that track showed that this sort of choppy drum and bass style from the Lost Words EP can work. And through Maze and Trinist releasing separately, we start to get more of an idea as to who did what. While Maze was in charge of the drum and bass production, Trinist focused more on the choppy details within. In this case, with a breakbeat release. Now this track is a bit inconsistent. The vocals kind of seem over-processed at times, and the first drop doesn't really stand out too much to me. It provides some tension as it progresses, and the post-drop works so well by contrasting that tension from the drop, providing a simple but sweet melody accompanied by some stuttering arpeggios. And it carries a sort of somber tone, feels like the aftermath of realization of losing someone that you love. And that's pretty much the tone of the lyricism afterward. The second drop focuses more on those arps, but again, it's the post-drop that winds up being even better. The emphasis on detail and the overall tone makes it stand out for me. And I'm pretty glad to see Trinist prove me wrong this year. Number 9. In comparison to other genres, I don't think I care too much for mid-tempo. My first impression of that genre was Imperium by Madeon, one of my favorite tracks from the FIFA 15 soundtrack. But I don't think I ever really expected any other mid-tempo track to ever match up with it in terms of quality. And while this track is nowhere near as good as the likes of Imperium, I guess I'll take what I can get. We've got a whole lot of first impressions on this list. How about a 3-for-1 special with this trio, providing a confident and hard-hitting mid-tempo release? The production throughout is pretty solid, and it works very well with Papa Khan's uncredited vocals. I like how the breaks have a bit more of a trap-based rhythm, and I also like the chord progression in the hook. And through this hook, Papa Khan is able to go all out on the vocals to try and make a statement. And all of that leads to a no-nonsense mid-tempo drop with deep synths and a bit of a grim atmosphere. The final drop is a bit different, providing a more triumphant production alongside Papa Khan's emphatic hook. And although the song isn't going to take the throne in terms of my list or in terms of mid-tempo, I still think the production is worth a listen. Number 8. Last year, it felt like September through November carried the same styles and even the same artists each month. But to be fair, some of these artists were working on their respective EPs. One of them even made my best list last year, and well, here's another one. In Touch was never really someone I expected to contend for my best list. It felt like his speed house style was just kind of there last year, but he closed out his EP at the start of this year very well with what might be his best release yet. The intro is fantastic, with the pads and echoing vocals providing a dreamy atmosphere. But from there, I can already sense the arguments against this. Yes, the vocal does get repetitive at times, especially in the drop, and yet it works. It's enjoyable enough with the percussion and the synths combining for a drop that manages to be cute and trippy at the same time. We'll have to wait until the end of the year to see if this sticks around in the top 10, but for now I think it's an underrated release. Check this out if you haven't already. Number 7. It's been a weird story for this track. I remember when I ranked it pretty highly in my community posts, and this ranking's in comparison with Monster Cat releases and other labels, by the way. Since then, I felt like I maybe overhyped this track. But fast forward a few months later, and I look back at my community posts to realize that I almost completely forgot about it. Now this track isn't as good as the likes of Closer and About You from last year, but it does showcase Roy's creativity within his releases. The breaks have some nice synths and vocal chops early on to provide some energy. I would argue the build up to the first drop is a little bit quick, but the drops themselves take a more experimental route. Opting for a distorted bell sound, easily more abrasive than the likes of a regular music box, but it meshes fairly well with the rest of the production in the first drop. I think I prefer the second drop though, where the aforementioned bell sounds go back and forth with some emphatic dubstep synths. It provides for a solid closer, and it's a strong example of quality mixed in with creativity. Now it's another track that I can't guarantee will wind up on my year-end list. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if Roy wound up providing something better on NCS this year. But for now, I think this box provides something to remember. Number 6. As an artist, intrigue is always important. Even if the style isn't usually a go-to for me, you can just stand out by providing something interesting. Extra points if it counts as a first impression. Take, for example, of all the releases on this list, this one might be the toughest one to explain, and that's part of what makes it so interesting. It's advertised as Jersey Club, which makes sense given its percussion and rhythm. The breaks do well enough to set up the scene with a sort of distorted percussion, which provides a contrast with the chord progression. But the drops provide much more of an impact here. Let's start by saying there is a lot going on, from the opera choir to the background synths, and it proceeds to go for a call and response as well, and I think it's great. Everything somehow seems to work together, and the pockets of silence within the drops provide an emphasis on dynamics. The second drop adds on to the energy with an extra riser as a great way to help close out the track. It's fun, it's creative, and it's an emphatic breath of fresh air that NCS desperately needed. Number 5. I think I need to make my stance clear on the influx of pop on this label, and I'll start by saying it hasn't been entirely bad. It's not what I tuned into NCS for, and thus I don't tend to have high expectations for pop music here. Most of the tracks that meet expectations, they often go in one ear and out the other for me. It is rare when one of these pop tracks can exceed expectations, and that's exactly what Bexy did. It is often tough to rank electropop in comparison with other facets of EDM, and that's mainly because there are different factors that you have to take into account. It's often vocal-oriented, and it tends to make the production more of a backdrop. Here, though, it winds up being such a chill earworm. The pads and echoing vocals are very influential in the progression of this track. Same case for the synths, especially as it builds up in the pre-chorus, eventually leading to a clean garage production with mellow synths and an infectious hook. And the saxophone adds on to that mellow atmosphere. The vocals and production are consistently great throughout, and that makes it, dare I say it, one of the best pop releases we've had on this label. It's rare when one of these winds up making my list, but this track has proven that it's here for a reason. Number 4. You want to know how to make any production more interesting? Add some color bass to it. If you saw my Monster Cat list last year, I don't think you should be too surprised to see a track like this make my list. Color bass might just be one of my favorite genres to listen to due to its creativity. And now it seems like it's influencing other genres here. Just like in Bonfire's Green, this track goes for a more experimental route to make it stand out, with 3 separate drops to provide a sense of intrigue, opting for a deep sustaining bass line combined with some laser synths for a catchy drop. I would say my favorite part of this track is actually in the vocal production. The vocoder does very well throughout this track, with and without the main vocal, and it all culminates in the last drop, a trap switch up alternating between all the elements used previously. It's a very creative track combining breakbeat and color bass together, and it was worth the experiment. Number 3. I almost put more plastic in my dishonorable mentions last year. Okay, look, I was not a fan of Take Me Back. The riser and the drop just never worked for me in terms of a Neurofunk production. So switching over to dance floor drum and bass might have been the best decision that More Plastic have made this year. They started the year off very strong alongside Halverson with Sunrise. Halverson's vocals are great throughout this track, and the hook stands out within these breaks. There's an adventurous tone within the melody and the overall subject matter of this hook, providing a lot of excitement approaching the drop. And the drop melody is simple yet emphatic, combined with some strong drum and bass percussion. And the guitar solo in the second drop is mixed fairly well with the halftime drum step pattern, providing an emphasis on energy. The tone throughout makes this a high quality release. I'll admit, when I first ranked it, I didn't expect it to be this high on my list, but the sunrise was bright in this track. The question from here is, which 2 tracks wound up shining brighter? Number 2. I thought this would be my number 1 when I first heard it. It felt like one of the few tracks that packed both energy and emotion on the label. And it's crazy to think that this track was so close to being cancelled. But eventually, after all of the issues were sorted out, we got this. Tatsunoushi had a pretty strong 2023, providing some solid hardstyle and happy hardcore releases throughout the year. But when I first heard this release, I knew it would, well, at least contend for the track of the year. The breaks are led by the vocal at first, but the elements added on mesh well with it. I said this last year with Can't Say No, but a lot of euphoric hardstyle and happy hardcore tracks rely on the drop melody to make it stand out. And this one is just magnificent. It's another simple melody that provides a lot of emotion, and it absolutely carries the tone of the drops, combined with the usual happy hardcore production to provide such an emphatic drop. It's a track that was very close to taking my number 1 spot, but let's find out why it didn't. Before we get there though, I just wanted to take a moment to talk about my gaming channel. There's a lot of content coming soon over there, so feel free to subscribe to that if you haven't already. With that out of the way, it is finally time to talk about number 1. There's a part of me that doesn't really want this to be my number 1. It's the predictable option, and one of these artists already topped my best list on Monster Cat last year. But let's not mince words. This label had a lack of leadership as of recently. Someone had to make a statement this year, and I'm glad it was these 2. For this track, Skybreak arrives to the NCS label alongside Keepsake, previously known as Richard Caddock if I'm not mistaken, and instead of the color brace that Skybreak has usually gone for on Monster Cat, he decides to go for drum step here. Keepsake takes charge of the vocals, which are consistently great throughout. The piano flares in the production are excellent, with two different styles within the two breaks to provide some creativity. Within the drops, we've got some confident leads, a memorable melody, and a dramatic progression to a sort of post-drop, which is fantastic. Keepsake provides some triumphant vocals to pair up with a strong drum step production. But to understand why this track has gotten so much acclaim, you have to take into account the nostalgia factor. It feels like nowadays, in order to stand out on this label, you have to provide something that showcases when NCS was at its best back then. Something that exudes energy, enjoyability, and eventually, memorability. And no track this year was able to do that any better than this release. And that is why Comet by Skybreak and Keepsake is the best NCS track of 2024 so far. And that wraps up this video. Let me know of your favorites and least favorites in the comments below. And if you guys enjoyed, feel free to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And I'll talk to you in the next video.